Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to today's webinar, Capital Planning Best Practices. My name is Mark Levine, and I am the Deputy Director of your New York State Association of Counties. Today's session will focus on why capital projects are a top priority for counties across New York State and how challenging they can be to plan, present, and manage from start to finish. Many local officials struggle with developing clear long-term capital plans, communicating needs to stakeholders, and tracking projects effectively over time. This presentation will outline the best industry-leading practices designed to help you save time, improve efficiency, and strengthen your county's overall approach to capital improvement plan budgeting and capital project management. We're having a few technical difficulties pulling up the presentation, but first I want to let you know that we have a few brief housekeeping announcements before we begin. This presentation will be recorded. There we go. Thank you, Jeanette. It will be made available to you on our website shortly after we conclude this webinar. We encourage you to ask questions. We have some experts in the field with us today and some practitioners, and you can ask a question by putting your question into the question panel on your dashboard. Jeanette, is there anything else to announce? All right, thank you very much. I am pleased to be able to introduce our speakers today. Rob Battaglia is a Senior Solutions Advisor at ClearGov, a leading provider
Mark, we are now live.
A leading provider of budget and planning software for local governments across the United States. Rob works directly with county and local governments of all sizes across New York on implementing the industry's best practices. Prior to working at ClearGov and in the GovTech industry, Rob spent nearly 8 years in many different positions in both government and politics in the state of New York. He holds a BA in political science with a concentration in American government from American University in Washington, D.C., and is a graduate of the New York GFOA's Government Finance Institute. Steve Wilson is the county administrator of Otsego County. He previously served as the first county administrator of Schoharie County. Steve has a strong background in government financial management. He is particularly recognized for his expertise in enhancing operational efficiency and driving strategic planning within county governments. In Otsego County, he introduced the first ever capital investment program, which the county began implementing this year, marking a significant milestone in its long-term planning and resource management. This is how today's webinar will unfold. First, Rob and Steve will have a conversation about capital planning in Otsego County. Then we will open it up for questions at that point. And then Rob is going to take over and provide a presentation on best practices on capital planning. And then I will open it up at the end for questions for Rob or Steve from the audience. So as you're going through, as you're listening to the conversation and then listening to Rob's presentation, and something comes up and you have a question, please put it in the questions tab of your dashboard, and we will get to those questions as soon as we can. It's my pleasure now to hand the microphone over to Rob Battaglia from ClearGov. Rob.
Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity this afternoon to be joined by Steve and NYSAC to talk with the NYSAC members about capital improvement plan best practices. As Mark alluded to, we're going to start today's program with a Q&A between myself and Steve Wilson from Otsego County. Just a quick background on why we're talking about capital planning and why it's so vitally important for members. Want to pull from the Government Finance Officers Association's website, the GFOA, on their definition and their rationale for why capital planning is so critically important for counties and local governments. They say local governments should prepare and adopt comprehensive, fiscally sustainable, and multi-year capital plans. Three main tenets to that. Number one, the procurement, design, construction, maintenance, and operation of capital assets are a critical activity of governments and therefore require careful planning. Number two, capital planning is critical to water, sewer, transportation, sanitation, technology, and other infrastructure and major equipment that are physical foundations for providing services to constituents and other essential public services. And number three, it is extremely difficult for governments to address the current and long-term needs of their citizens without a sound multi-year capital plan that clearly identifies capital needs, funding options, and operating budget impacts. And from my side of the conversation, we work with hundreds of county governments in New York State and across the country, as well as over 1,000 local governments on implementing a lot of the industry best practices we'll be covering today. And I think what Steve at Otsego County has done is a good testament to why capital planning is so important. So to that end, Steve, my first question for you as part of our Q&A, right now most folks are in the process of the annual budget process, mostly concerned about the operating budget for obvious reasons, but the capital budget process, that has a lot more variability across county government operations and local government operations. How does Otsego County approach capital planning? And maybe you can give some examples, including timeline, some of the different stakeholders involved, how long the plan actually is, and what's the overall goal for that process?
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me to participate in this. The important thing to understand about Otsego County is we are just getting started. We built a capital plan in the year 2024, primarily focused on county facilities because, frankly, coming out of COVID, our maintenance costs had been, well, our costs were now rising because we hadn't done a lot in recent years. So we developed the plan, including with costs and proposed timelines and the like. We went through our normal, regular legislative process and ultimately had the board approve this capital plan over quite a few years, at least 5. But we didn't start implementing that until we moved a particular project into the operating budget. And since most of our capital plan projects we anticipate will be debt funded, we're mostly concerned in the operating budget with the debt service. One thing that's important to understand, not only did we not have a capital plan, but it's been years since we've had any debt. So the whole thing is new to us. So that's how we kind of started. We spent most of this year in, if you will, determining sites for some of our highest priority projects. And we are now, I think, ready to begin implementation in 26 and 27.
So Steve, you gave a little background there and some of those challenges that you kind of inherited in the past, talking about your debt levels. Could you give a little bit more context to maybe why some of those challenges happened before you came into the county, and kind of give a little bit more detail maybe into on a day-to-day, how you're exactly, solving those challenges and actually implementing a capital plan.
Sure. Well, the first thing to realize is that, how can I put this? I'm practically the first county administrator here in Otsego County. Our first county administrator only worked here for about 7 months before he left for health reasons. We didn't run him out. The capital plan was part of a comprehensive redo of the overall budget and planning process, including a strategic plan, being more transparent, and being more analysis or data driven in the operating budget, in sort of quarterly program and budget reviews, and of course in the capital plan. All that was because of the growing gap between our overall expenses and our revenues. Our revenues are fairly flat. Unlike a lot of counties, we aren't very dependent on the property tax. By far, the sales tax and occupancy tax is a much more important revenue driver for us. But it was clear we need to just get much more sophisticated across the board. And we knew, maybe not at the beginning, the community was going to be looking for county help one way or another in more community facilities. Like, for instance, we have a small airport that likely is going to need some capital support. So we wanted to put these things in place kind of ahead of any serious fiscal constraints on it. So we really have been focused on building a process.
So, Steve, this process that you and your team at Otsego County have undertaken to improve your capital improvement projects and assets, how are you going about presenting this information both to your stakeholders internally to get their buy-in, as well as to present to the public? I think from a resident's perspective, capital projects can often be those budgeted items that get, a lot of attention, as opposed to maybe items in the operating side. How does your county government communicate its capital budget and capital plan to the public specifically?
Well, in 2 ways. The first, kind of obvious, we decided to get much more transparent. So we attempted to use products like the various ClearGov products to simply make things more understandable to our residents. We used to kind of send out in a PDF these big spreadsheets with account numbers in it and expect people to understand. That's mostly the the operating budget. And occasionally, if we had to do some major repairs, renovations, something like that, that was thrown in there just as if it were an operating cost. So we did use the capital planning product that ClearGov offers, both to develop our plans and also to share them with residents. But in a way, I was going to say more important, but really maybe a prerequisite. The first thing we did was we contracted with various engineering firms to get a solid understanding of our facilities, what their needs were in terms of renovation and improvement. And we used that to actually develop the project by project plan. I got to tell you, the public has not been very interested thus far. And I think basically that's because it's been years, possibly decades, since we've actually done a major capital project. So this is going to be new for all of us.
I appreciate the insight there on your process. Do you have a different process, or have you also, are you currently remaking the process for the actual management of the projects, kind of tracking them from, shovel in the ground to, completion?
Yes. So what we are going to do is when we get, well, the first thing is simply to find sites. We've been engaged in that most of the year, and I think we will shortly secure a site for actually a number of our projects. And before going forward with the details of each of those projects, we intend to contract with, for lack of a better term, a project manager, someone who can review what various engineering or architectural contractors, what construction managers, that sort of stuff. We will provide that source or that support to us. I believe the board is actually considering establishing a special committee to oversee the management of capital projects. But that has yet to be done. I would mention one other thing in terms of both the development and the management. Our county legislators have been very much involved. This is not a situation where, the departments or my office kind of does all the work. Well, we do a lot of work, but the board is really highly engaged in the details of all of these projects. And that is, I think, a great strength as we go forward.
Excellent. Well, Steve, appreciate that. We have a few more questions for Steve that we have prepared as part of our program. I know Mark put a blurb in earlier about the audience being able to submit questions. Again, if you have something very, very relevant to the conversation we're having right now with Steve, feel free to pop that in. If it's something more in general nature, we'll be able to cover that on the webinar today, and the NISAC staff are monitoring the questions. Steve, next question I had for you, you alluded to earlier, you not only have been remaking your capital planning process, you also mentioned the strategic planning process too. Similarly to this capital project planning, this new capital project planning Otsego County is doing, can you give us some insight into the county's overall strategic planning process, and is there any overlap there?
Sure, absolutely. So first off, the thing I guess we developed in, I guess it was in 23 and 24, our strategic plan. And it's a little bit different from many other strategic plans because we essentially develop strategic plans for each of our offices. What we found is a lot of county departments, they're basically doing mandates, or they're things we're just not going to walk away from. Like highways. This is upstate New York. We're going to be plowing roads for as long as there are roads. So what we did is we created a framework for each department to put 4 or 5 of its strategic objectives. And then we had them associate, we call them priority outcomes, by the way. For each of those priority outcomes, our departments identify what we call essential activities that support those. So if anyone is familiar with the concept of program logic models, this is kind of like that. We know for each of our departments what their goals are and what it takes to get those goals. And we integrate that with our budget. We just did that for the 26 budget. I think it went well, although I got a list of things that we need to improve on that. One of those items, overarching all departments, is the various capital projects. That's separate, and like I say, it shows up in the operating budget as debt service. But that is one of our 7 or 8 overarching goals for the entire county that include both the capital plan and the strategic plan.
And I think I saw in the NISAC Daily email newsletter, some press Otsego County had around its strategic plan. Can you talk about the tools you're using for that as well, and how, if anyone's curious about, what you're doing on strategic planning, how they can find that?
Oh, sure. So at the moment, and don't get alarmed by this, Rob, but we're a ClearGov organization. We use the ClearGov capital planning module, the budget book module. We use their module, I believe you call it transparency, for quarterly reporting. And then we use the recent ClearGov strategic planning module. And we just started this year, actually just about a month ago, we do quarterly program updates in which all of our departments essentially explain what they've been doing for the last quarter, and that is the basis for our authorizing committees, so to speak, to do whatever oversight they're going to do for any particular department. And we just made that public, like I say, about a month ago. And I think we got a little bit of press here locally about how we're doing that and what it says. It's a little new for our department heads to have to make that totally public, as it is for our board, our parent committees. But the board is really appears to be strongly supportive of this increased transparency, and I think the community likes it.
So Steve, you've given some really, again, great insight into the work you're doing kind of under the hood at Otsego County. I'm sure there are other counties on this webinar that are thinking, oh, this sounds like some of the work we're doing, or maybe some of the work we're hoping to be doing. I know it's early days here, but do you have any real world success stories where kind of having and maintaining these robust plans and these new processes have been critically important for the work that you're doing as a county from a day-to-day perspective?
Sure. Let me start with a non-success story. Doing this stuff is hard. Your departments, it may be a different way of thinking, and you have to factor that in. The success is, and it frankly is department by department, board committee by committee, is their engagement. When they start talking about real issues, when they start working together to identify real real solutions, that is the payoff. We had a very difficult budget process this time. We started with what looked like about a 15, almost $16 million budget gap. That's almost 9% of our total budget. A huge number to try and work through. But because we have put most of these things in advance, our board knew what our department's goals were. They knew what it took to get to those goals. They knew what our budget numbers and costs were. And they were able to make a series of very specific decisions about what to fund, what not to fund, including taking the first steps on some capital projects. That is, I think, the payoff. I would say when we first figured out that budget gap, our department heads and our board members were pretty stressed. It was an intense time, but as we walked through that budget process, that's where we saw the payoff from these other things like the capital plan and the strategic plan.
Steve, I feel like a lot of what you've said today can be boiled down into some helpful advice and suggestions. So had this last question planned for you. Feel free to take it in any direction, but just kind of, I think, a good way to wrap up the conversation today. For those looking to enhance, strengthen, or redo their capital improvement planning process, what advice do you have for them on the line today?
One, go slow, but two, don't quit. The payoff comes for your internal operations, but also sooner or later, your community is going to want you to participate, build something. Maybe it's a community swimming pool, maybe it's a homeless shelter, maybe it's enhanced road repair, whatever it is. These process will make the decision making and the management of that much easier on you and your elected officials.
Well, that's a great place to end the conversation, I think, Steve. Thank you so much for joining today and providing that insight. And I believe Steve's going to be hanging around for the second half of this presentation. So again, we'll be able to answer any questions the audience has for Steve specifically. We're now going to, with the remainder of our time, talk about some industry best practices, including some things that Otsego County has implemented into their process. Don't believe I have control over there we go. Just gonna go to the next slide here. Okay. So we talked earlier about the importance of capital planning. We have a slide here that kind of summarizes what I discussed earlier. One of the things that's on this slide that I want to call out as a best practice from the Government Finance Officers Association, the GFOA, is they talk about that, how long a capital plan should be. They say at a bare minimum, your capital plan should be at least 3 years. I believe they've updated actually this best practice recently. It says on the website now 5 years. When the slide was created, they called out preferably 5. So, you know, if you're looking for, I guess, a C, if we were going on a grade school basis, 3 years would be a C. But if you're looking to get that A or B plus, 5 is really the floor you should be looking for when putting together this multi-year capital improvement plan. So let's talk about a best practice around the workflow of building out the capital budget and the capital plan. And we're going to frame this around the concept of collecting capital requests. So the best practice here is going to be creating a centralized database, utilizing forms for your end users to submit these requests into the database. So your operating budget process, right? That's very line item driven usually. If you're a bigger county, maybe that's also a form-based approach. When it comes to capital projects, each project needs to be evaluated on its own basis. And then when you're actually putting together your spending plan, you need to be able to compare apples to apples or oranges to oranges. So looking at hundreds of local governments across the country, those that have an A-rated capital planning process, they all have this kind of workflow in common. They're using a form-based approach. Your forms, ideally, you might have multiple forms for different types of projects, right? From a evaluation perspective, whether you're a county administrator, whether you're a budget director, whether you're a member of a capital plan committee, whether you're an overall board member or an analyst, whomever. The type of data you need to collect from your departments and other end users internally around a building or infrastructure request is going to be a little different than the type of data you would collect around a vehicle or asset or a software purchase. So each of these forms should have really well thought out questions that are unique to that project type's requirements. And by taking this database type approach, right, we can collect requests not just for the budget year, in this case 2026, but for future years as well, 27, 28, 29. If we are going to build a multi-year capital plan, we need to collect requests around those future years and have those housed in our database for planning presentation purposes. It also will make it easier if you are using that kind of form-based approach, that database approach, to carry that data forward each year, right? If these are multi-year projects, there's going to be estimates for year 2 and year 3. We can carry those forward using that form-based approach. You're also going to want to think about deadlines for submissions, right? We don't want this to be something that is year-round, right? There should be a deadline, ideally, for considerations and funding for that that capital budget year. And sometimes your capital planning process, you may want to set that final deadline for request submissions sooner than the operating side. Maybe you even want to, I know there's counties that adopt their capital budgets before they even undertake the operating side. So you're going to want to put some thought and consideration into what kind of timeline as well as the workflow makes sense for your county. In terms of a modern best practice, there's cloud-based programs that can implement things like this. Steve alluded to a program they're using over at Otsego County for this. In terms of the actual information you want to collect around a capital project, a capital request, the best practice here, you're going to want to collect both financial data and non-financial data to bring that request to life. The analogy I often use when I'm having discussions like this, you think about your operating budget and the capital budget, the capital plan. It's kind of, they're different. They should be a little different, right? Just like if you are in your personal life, right? The way you budget for groceries or, entertainment subscriptions is going to be different than how you budget for a new car, right? Or a new house, right? You're just probably going to collect a little bit more detail, a little bit more data. You're going to have a lot more questions that need to be answered around those bigger type purchases, those more complex purchases. So when you are looking to collect the data, and in most cases, right, this data is probably coming from a department head, you're going to want to collect things like narrative, images, attachments, timelines, geographic locations. You're going to want to, the rule of thumb is bring this project to life, right, with that submission. And you can actually see here on the screen an example of a capital project, a capital request. That's right from Otsego County's online reports. Within that data you're collecting, right, you're going to want to not just show the budget estimates on the expense side for that request at a high level, right? How much are we budgeting for overall in the budget year and those future years, but ideally breaking that information down, right? Okay, of that $4 million in year one. How much is going to construction and maintenance? How much is going to design? How much is going to engineering? How much is going into planning? And any other categories, right? We want to be able to really get a good picture of where that money is going. Same thing on the revenue side. How are you using money to fund this project? What funding sources are you using? And each counties are going to be a little different. General fund, debt, enterprise funds, shared services, maybe state funding, state and local grants, federal grants. So you can want to be able to contrast all the different expense types and the revenue types for that project. The ability to show savings and revenues generated by a project, right? Is that new vehicle purchase, which costs $100,000, going to replace an older vehicle in the fleet that would have incurred a maintenance cost had that stayed in the fleet, right? We want to maybe show that net difference to really get a good picture of the true impact of that purchase. Will this project be generating money for the county at some point? That's important information to, again, understand and consider when evaluating these projects. And the GFOA talks about in their budget award criteria at a planning higher level, showing the operating impact of the capital plan. It's a lot easier to understand that and calculate that if you're tracking it at the project level and then rolling that up. And again, a best practice here, as you can see with Otsego County's example on the screen, software can make it easier for you to collect this information, but more importantly, continue a dialogue with your requesters on this information. If there are changing data fields on the narrative side or on the financial side as you wrap up the process, right? Using cloud-based technology is going to make it easier to make sure that those pictures are updating the picture of the project, not just the individual pictures, to better get a sense of where we're going with that project. Department priority. So you're going to want to understand where are your department's actual priorities with their requests. So certain departments are going to be submitting, many different capital requests, and maybe taking a step back, you should encourage your departments and your end users to submit their requests, even if they're unlikely to get funded, because going through the exercise of identifying needs is going to be vitally important for your county's operations, not just now, but in the future. If that grant at one point makes itself finally available, you're going to put yourself ahead of the field to secure that grant, because you'll actually have a need identified, right? So you're going to want to encourage your end users to submit as many requests as possible, even if most of them are going to be unfunded. Having said that, you're going to want to be able to cut through those numbers of requests by being able to understand where their priorities lie. Oftentimes we'll hear counties implement a process, something similar to best case versus maybe like a wish list, like stretch. Problem with that, where you have the ability for a department to basically have no limit to how many requests can be categorized, it's going to essentially bake in bias into that process, right? No offense to any departments here on this call, but you're going to think that most of your projects are important, which rightfully so. But for the evaluators of this process, right, the folks in the administrator's office, the county executive's office, the budget office, the capital committee the capital committees, they need to be able to see things globally and, again, compare apples to apples. So one of the things that's a best practice would be ranking these requests with a numerical value, right? If you are submitting 10 requests, you should be able to rank a numerical value to that. This is my third most important request of the 10 I'm submitting. So that indicates a clearly unbiased ranking, right? You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then also when you're then evaluating things across departments, right? If we only have so much funding available, it'll be easier to assign importance if you're able to compare your 1s and 2s and 3s across your departments and across the county-wide organization. That's from a individual perspective, a department's perspective, a requester's perspective. We also need to be able to assess priority at that organizational level. And one way counties and communities are doing this is by using a scorecard-based approach to assessing priority. So with the scorecard, again, whom is doing this is going to differ county by county. Again, maybe this is done at the executive level. Maybe there's a committee that's doing this. Maybe there are different individuals who are evaluating this. Maybe it's a multi-pronged approach. But being able to provide scoring and weighting based on all different types of factors in your decision-making process is going to make a more transparent process and make it easier to assign the dollars to not just financially, not to assign those dollars to projects, not just based on financial consideration. So, you know, Steve, as an example at Otsego County, he talked about how his county has a strategic plan, right? And there's a framework they went about creating that plan, right? I'm sure there are aspects of that plan that they can extrapolate and provide and juxtapose to the capital plan when evaluating projects. Your county may have, you know, a defined capital planning policy already in place that defines, you know, how you evaluate projects. If you don't, you may want to think about this and pull from other sources, whether you have a strategic plan or a comprehensive plan or just some industry best practices. The Government Finance Officer Association, they talk about doing something similar to this, and some of the criteria they talk about is financial impact versus legal impact versus environmental and health, as an example. So again, being able to score these projects at that county-wide level and really taking in those other considerations other than just financial is going to make it easier for you to assign importance, understand how decisions are being made across the county, and then again, make it easier to allocate those dollars to your important projects. So when we're talking about multiple projects, multiple years, there's several different ways to kind of, you know, drive down the highway, so to say. So when it comes to the actual process of budgeting and decision making around these capital projects, it can be a lot more complex than the operating budget. And being able to prepare and provide different budgets and funding options for your board members and decision makers, it's going to make it more easier to make those decisions, right? Making it clear what's available from each funding source and what the project impacts will be, right? It makes it easy to see what's going to tip you over into the red. Being able to save and compare your different budget versions, similarly to the operating side, right? That's going to provide some uniformity across processes, and then comparing those different scenarios, right? Especially if you are kind of starting the capital planning process earlier than the operating budget, right? There might be some considerations and factors that haven't been flushed out yet or finalized as you make these final decisions. So being able to have your best case, base case, you know, worst case scenarios as an example, being able to visualize those, or simply if you're coming down to your last couple million that you're looking to allocate in your capital budget, and there's a couple different ways to go in terms of how you want to allocate that. Being able to show those trajectories across those 3, 5, 6, 10 years into the future for your board members visually, it's going to make it easier to make, again, those funding decisions. So a lot of what we just talked about centered around building the budget. Now let's talk about some best practices around presenting the capital budget and capital plan. So from a reporting perspective, when it comes to presenting this information, you're going to want to show your capital budget information in a comprehensive way that includes the financial impact of the capital budget, as well as the actual financial details of each project. You can see here an example of a pretty simple report that really does a good job of presenting a full financial story, right? We can see here what the project is, what the budget for the project is, a little detail. We can see here not just how much the project costs overall, we can see it broken down by year, we can see it broken down by cost category, we can see those we can see those individual rows across years, and then we can also contrast that against the revenue side of the project, right? How it's going to be funded, right? Very, very simplistic report, but very, very effective at telling that story around that project. And again, right, being able to additionally include some other information, maybe more narrative, maybe scorecard totals, department priorities, all of that extra gravy is just going to make it that much more effective when presenting this information both internally as well as to the public. Steve talked about how his county is approaching its website presentations, moving away from PDFs into interactive website-based presentations. Software exists now to present these interactive budgets, whether it be a capital plan, whether it be an operating budget, or anything in between. If we are going down this route of sharing the vision of your capital plan in that interactive format, it's recommended that you do that in both the one-year view as well as the multi-year capital plan view. Depending on the viewer of that document, right, they might want to look at it from either lens. Creating interactive request pages with charts and graphs and images and attachments and data tables is always going to be ideal, right? The average person can better understand complex information in a simple to read graph than in text or a data table. And software can automate a lot of this for us. And of course, the GFOA already has a lot of budget award best practices overall, where capital planning is a tenet of that. So one of their core overall budget best practices recommendations that I think kind of hits the nail on the head here. And what we're talking about is you're going to want to present this information in the most easy to read and understandable way for the average person, make it as dynamic as possible. We have some examples of how Otsego County and a couple other counties in New York are presenting their capital plans. I think we may have these later on in a little bit here to share. If not, we can include those with some follow-up. Even after this call, highly recommend you check out the capital plans for FY26 from these three counties. I think all three of them are doing an excellent job, as are a lot of counties across New York State. But just wanted to give some kudos to Otsego County, Ulster County, and Chemung County, who are doing an excellent job with their capital planning presentations for FY26. Finally, just want to talk about a couple best practices around the actual management of capital projects. So a best practice here, once we've actually gone through the work of building our capital plan and managing our capital plan, we need to track our capital projects from start to finish once that new budget year is now the current fiscal year. And being able to manage those projects through workflows and a centralized dashboard is going to be mission critical. So you want to ensure that within this process, the resources are being used as planned. It's going to help prevent mismanagement or overspending. It's going to help provide data-driven insights to optimize project outcomes and justify decisions, as well as sharing the progress of these projects to the public, as well as to your internal stakeholders, right? Your capital projects are oftentimes the ones that get the stories written up about them in the news, not so much that you switched maybe internal providers for a service within a department internally that most folks aren't going to know about. So the best practice here would be using a map-based presentation to communicate your capital project updates internally and to the public. being able to communicate project financial updates, right? Spend versus actuals versus budget, phases, timelines, as well as any updates that might be relevant to stakeholders, and allowing your stakeholders, both internally and externally, to interact with these projects, right? Ask questions through that web portal or submit questions that can be addressed privately or publicly, as well as being able to maybe get email sent to them from the county on any relevant updates on that project as well. So just some overall advantages to using kind of some of the tools we're talking about here. I know we're coming up here on the hour, so Mark and Jeanette, I was hoping maybe, do we have any questions from the audience that we want to address here before we run out of time? I know we're a little behind schedule here.
We do not, at this point, have any questions from the audience. We have a few more minutes with Rob Battaglia and Steve Wilson from Otsego County. So if you have a question, now's a good time for you to put that in your questions dashboard of the GoToMeeting. Thank you.
So I'll give a little bit more detail then here on this slide. Give folks a minute here to submit any questions that might have them for myself or for Steve. If you do want to go the route of implementing a software program to help manage this process, capital planning presentation, capital project management, some of those advantages that come built into software versus maybe doing something a little bit more manual in like a spreadsheet or in a homegrown database, login permissions and settings, right? Being able to manage this through cloud-based technology easily that integrates with your other email systems through a single sign-on is going to be vitally important, and having those different permissions, right? The level of data and access and management that someone in the administrator's office or the finance budget office would have going to be a little different than what a request or a department needs to do versus maybe a board member. Having that kind of waterfall workflow, having, you know, if your divisions are within departments, having the ability for someone to submit requests up the chain, right? Engineering sends it to Public Works sends it to the administrator's office. From a database and reporting perspective, right? Integrations throughout, being able to see the analytics built for you automatically, having your presentations integrated, right? If you make a change to a number or a change to a project, having that update in the actual presentation as well, or having built-in reports with a click of the button you can customize and publish. And then finally, being able to just work more smarter, right? You can work remote, have your information backed up with built-in IT cloud security. It's just going to make your process that much more powerful. We have here again in the slide some examples of some capital plans. So when we send those slides out, you'll be able to access that as well. Mark, any questions?
Yeah, so this came in. So let's see, hold on a sec. Boom. Can the software evaluate multiple capital projects in the same general location to prioritize projects or evaluate for multiple objectives? A common example would be repaving a road and then digging it up to improve the capacity of the storm sewer.
Theoretically, yes. At the end of the day, you know, the program's going to be pretty flexible in how you want to set it up. So if that is a use case you envision, then when you are kind of setting up the way the data is ingested and evaluated and what your evaluation criteria are, it'll be incumbent on you to kind of set up the options to process that information appropriately. But short answer, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so this is a great idea, doing capital planning and implementing this. If we wanted to implement this in our county beginning in 2026, how would we go about doing that?
Well, that's a great question. If you're interested in doing the things we talked about, The good news is that the company that I work at, ClearGov, which is a provider of this software that Otsego County uses, and that we have a relationship with NISAC as well, and the National Association of Counties. We're available for purchase. It's as simple as hopping on a consultation with myself, where we would evaluate kind of your process. We would talk about it and walk through some of the basic requirements of setup and onboarding. But Steve, maybe you can provide a little insight. I mean, it's pretty much as simple as signing a pretty bare bones agreement and going through a basic implementation process, which includes training, and then getting the keys to the car, so to say, and off to the races. Steve, do you want to provide a little bit more insight?
Before you hand it off to Steve, I think the questioner was indicating or asking, like, how long does it take to get started? If we wanted to roll this out in 2026 and it's the end of 2025 and we wanted to roll this out, what does it look like from signing to beginning to use the product?
You're looking at somewhere between a few weeks to, at the longest, a couple months. And it really is, quite frankly, based on the speed of the client, not necessarily the vendor. We had a community in Westchester County that had their capital budget built out in 2 weeks from the date they signed an agreement. So not very long at all. Like I said, it's pretty much incumbent upon the client to check a couple boxes on their end, such as going through training, which doesn't need to take very long. I know we're here at the hour. Steve, did you want to provide maybe 30 seconds on what your implementation looked like?
Sure. We started in January. We already have a contract in place, which we just approved beginning in the beginning of the year. Collecting all the projects, going through a legislative review and prioritization, actually publishing the document, basically got us to about November. So 11 months all told.
Great, thank you.
From a budget building perspective, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So there are no other questions at this time. I want to offer to our participants, I thank you again for joining us for this webinar. If you have any questions, you can reach out to Rob directly, or you can reach out to me. That's Mark Levine or mlevine@nisac.org. And I'm sure Steve would take a question as well too. I can forward the question over to Steve Wilson if you have one. Or if you probably have his contact information, you can reach out to him directly. I thank Steve Wilson, the County Administrator for Otsego County, and Rob Battaglia, the Senior Solutions Advisor for ClearGov, for joining us and lending their expertise and their time today for this webinar. You can check in to our website in tomorrow morning for a copy of the recording, and we encourage you to share it with the members of your team or colleagues from other counties who might be exploring capital planning software, and they could benefit from this. So thank you very much, Jeanette. We're good to go with ending this program. Thank you.